Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, for wherever you are joining from. I'll acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Ngunnawal people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all join from today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. I'm the founder of WiSDM, Belinda Newham. So WiSDM, I just want to presence for you what it is. So WiSDM is a community aiming to grow the number of women in strategic decision making and provide support to women decision makers. We know that diversity of opinion is key to achieving great outcomes in decisions that matter. We're committed to having women represented and supported in decision-making roles. We share experiences, build best practice, and provide a pathway for women decision makers of the future. We are committed to having women represented and supported in decision-making roles. We identify gaps and obstacles. We're really committed to that. We identify gaps and obstacles that make it hard for women to participate in strategic decisions and create momentum around these issues to affect change. We want to educate gender identities in our community. Thank you for joining me again. This is our 6th session today. I'm just going to start by welcoming you to introduce yourself in the chat box if you like. The format we generally use here is the chat box. If you've got any questions or comments you want to make, my guest and I, who I'll introduce shortly, will be very happy to engage with your questions throughout, and I'll make sure that we refer to those. Don Gomez, who you'll see online from time to time, he is very much my behind-the-scenes tech supporter. So if you've got any, reach out to him direct, and he'll also be making sure that I keep an eye on anything in the box. So please do introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know for women in strategic decision making, and throughout the session, please do ask us any questions. So I want to start the session today with our WiSDM Wrap. So WiSDM Wrap is an initiative to get present to some of the recent highlights for women in strategic decision making, to take note of the gaps and obstacles, and to identify impact. It's a look at some of the highlights or the lowlights for women in strategic decision making over the previous fortnight. It's not a comprehensive list, but it does represent some of the things that have been brought to my attention over the fortnight myself. So 21st of August looks like this. So the first thing I came across was some new research from the University of South Australia showing a significant gender pay gap across most Australian firms, 35% less than their male counterparts, despite them being of equal calibre, education and achievement. So we know that gender pay gap is an issue, and what struck me about this research from Uni of South Australia was the links to organisational performance and decision making. So Professor Carol Kulik said, we hear a lot about the benefits of women in executive levels. They provide different views and perspectives, reduce risks, improve decision making and promote performance. But if a firm has a large gender pay gap, promoting women to the top team will neither deliver benefits for the individual nor the organisation. The cause, they suspect, is that underpaying women sends a powerful signal that the organisation has low expectations about women's contributions, that women executives have a lower status and less influence than their male counterparts. This in turn makes women executives less forthright with their views and men more likely to discount their female colleagues' opinions. So the research says ultimately a gender pay gap reduces the extent to which women's voices can influence the executive's actions and decisions. So the firm gets no value from the diversity within the team. I'll share the link to that research, which I think is very interesting. Look at the specific link between gender diversity and decision-making and the pay gap. So the second thing I wanted to mention was the role of women in peace and conflict resolution decision. In July, the UN Women hosted a global conference on gender-inclusive peace processes, and the conference explored good practices and strategies for gender inclusive constituency building and the links between constituency building and women's meaningful participation in formal peace processes. And there was a particular focus there in the Middle East and North Africa region. So reporting from that conference included some alarming statistics really around gender diversity. So women's direct participation and representation in formal peace processes continues to be the one area that lags behind in implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So between 1992 and 2019, women served as only 6% of mediators, 6% of signatories, and 13% of negotiators globally. The conference found the COVID-19 outbreak has shed an even greater light on the full extent of gender inequality in contexts affected by conflicts, and it's increased the urgency of fostering gender inclusive approaches to harness sustainable peace. In this context, empowering women leaders to participate in peace-building decisions becomes increasingly crucial. So women who participate in peace processes tend to represent broader and more diverse constituencies, ensuring a range of views and interests are represented and peace processes are fully democratised. So that's what we want for good decision-making. So some speakers at the conference were calling for more work to be done at the government and institutional levels to connect women's grassroots movements with the formal representatives who sit at the decision-making tables. And others were looking at the power of role modelling and setting benchmarks of 50-50 gender representation at the decision-making tables to have that lasting structural change. So again, I'll share the links to that article and some of the conference findings for that section. To mention here is just, so it doesn't have a specific link or an article, I just want to reflect on the number of women we have in strategic decision-making that are highly visible at the moment I hope in these discussions, I strive to not be political or make judgment on the decisions being made, but the way they're being made, so that we have women represented in those decisions. And so if we look at across all of our premiers, chief ministers and chief health officers that are really highly visible at the moment, particularly in some of the states, we can notice that 2 of the 8 premiers or chief ministers are women and 4 of the chief health officers are women. So that's what our gender equality at this head of state looks like. As at today, every state and territory has had at least one female government lead except for South Australia. And the ACT has had the most, with 3 serving throughout the 27-year history here in the ACT. And both New South Wales and Queensland have had a second female premier serving in their respective jurisdictions. Interestingly, the most female heads to serve concurrently was 4, and that was over 315 days in 2011 to 2012. So just a thing to notice there about some of those women that are really in the forefront of decision-making, strategic decision-making around things that are certainly impacting everyone here. Just got a message that my video is breaking up, so I apologise for that. That's the wisdom wrap for the 25th of August. I'll keep an eye on if this is becoming a technical issue. I'll look at some alternative internet issues. I'm sure we can all appreciate the working from home situation and things that we're all in at the moment. So what we're all here for today really is to welcome our guest, and I invite you, Jillian, if you'd like to turn on your video there now, or I can do, there we go. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
And I'd just like to introduce you. I'm going to read your bio out so we can all get to know you a little bit before we kind of dive into the discussion today. So Jillian Formentin is a chartered professional engineer of 25 years and has been accountable for the safe and effective operation of multi-site and dangerous goods operations and public governance of safety legislation. For over 15 years, Jillian has provided direct consulting services to major industry stakeholders and contractors for the safe construction and operation of oil, gas, electricity and mining facilities. She was last year's WA President of Engineers Australia and continues to lead within the engineering community, including through her role currently as the Business Development Manager at Clough. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, that sounds so impressive, doesn't it?
It is impressive. I'm impressed, and I'm sure everyone here is impressed. So actually, while we're on that, I think what would be great is to just hear a little bit more about you, your career journey, kind of what's brought you to where you are today, and then, you know, let's specifically look at some of those decision-making aspects. But yeah, just take us on a bit of the journey of your career.
Sure. Thanks, Belinda. And it is great to see your face all the way over there in Canberra.
I know, yes. So Julie's joining us from WA. So yeah, we're on literally opposite sides of the country.
Opposite side. Great. Well, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. It is kind of odd to be talking to lots of people and only be able to see a couple of faces, but it's really great to be with you all. And thank you for your interest in decision making, because I think it's been a really important part of my career, and this is a great opportunity to kind of step through it a bit. So I guess some of the early decisions I made was, well, what's the kind of difference I want to make with my life? You know, I grew up in southern Tasmania, and, you know, the options for young girls back then, like 40, 50 years ago, were less than they are now, for sure. You know, I grew up in a country town. At school, I was good at maths and science, and often got, a few curious kind of glances and conversations from people because they didn't understand why I would be so interested in that. It was definitely a nerdy thing to be interested in. But it seemed pretty obvious to me that the best choices I could make would be to develop myself, really, find the right pathway to, partly for me, it was to get off the island and to live the biggest life that I could. So I did a mechanical engineering degree at the University of Tasmania, something that I'm incredibly proud of. Not just because it's a lot of hard work, but it was against the norm. And I think some of the even then, and the women that went before me, it was even more challenging, I think. But the opportunities that it's opened up for me have been amazing. I think one of my smartest decisions were when I came out of university. I realized that I knew very little. I had a good solid theoretical degree. I could, all those, solving, puzzles and equations from first principles, but I knew very little. So I went looking for my first career role where I would be trained and developed in the more practical aspects. And I became a cadet engineer, it was called back then, for the Gas Corporation of Tasmania, which is now Origin Energy. So that was quite a long time ago. So, and I was in the PPE every day. I learned how to manage the maintenance of the fleet of LPG vehicles, manage the dangerous goods site, the people. I had the opportunity to be pretty much in every role within the organisation, including running the conversion program for the city of Launceston to retire the old Towns gas system, which was really remarkable. I was like 23 and was accountable for all those customers, the safety and the integrity of that changeover. And then I came to Western Australia as the operations manager for the LPG distribution for all of Western Australia. And I think it was the day after my 26th birthday. So I often look back and go, wow, that was so young. But then I've had roles. I was a principal engineer for gas utilisation with the West Australian Government, energy safety, and then launched into a consulting career for the 15 years pretty much following that. I had a few little stints doing different things, but all to keep creating the opportunity for me to be able to make the biggest choices I could, but also make the biggest difference I could with my career. And then I got married to the most fabulous man in the world. And
sounds like a good decision then.
It was a very good decision. In fact, one of my stepdaughters, Grace, is online. Hello, Grace.
Welcome, Grace.
And it's really it's extraordinary. And I think one of the things that has really helped me stay true to the big life I want to lead is being a walking, talking demonstration of anything's possible. If you've got the courage to create pathways for what you want, then you really can. And I'm just like, just getting started. This is a brand new role for me at Clough. I haven't been here 2 months yet, and extraordinary organisation. They've been in operation for over 100 years, which is that must be at least one of the oldest engineering companies in Australia. And to be part of that rich history, as well as the big future of all the different complex issues, it's the hydrogen industry, there's the climate change, and all the different new energy solutions, including sustainable infrastructure and everything that is ahead of us, is part of my role now, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of
I can hear that. That sounds pretty
start.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'd love to hear, so you mentioned a few kind of really key, well, it sounds like very key decisions that you're involved in, particularly throughout your career, starting off pretty young in some pretty big, roles. How did you find, like, what was your experience of being in part of those decisions where you're looking at the, my guess is there's sort of the tiering of decisions. There's a decision that we're going to change over our kind of, and I'm clearly not an engineer, but we're going to change over our gas infrastructure. We're going to do it differently. And then trickling down through, there must be a whole range of decisions that have strategic implications that are being made the whole way through. What's your personal experience of being in those roles like?
Well, all sorts of different experiences in that, Belinda. Like I've had stages in my career where I got maybe a little fascinated or even attached to being right, and not necessarily being right according to what my point of view was, but to not get into trouble or to make sure I looked good in front of other people. So I went through stages where I was, rather than really making even the best decision, I was making the decision that I thought other people would admire. It's limiting, right? Like I mean, there are times in my career where I'm going, wow, I'm being more not something that I am actually creating something, like, and, like, it's still the case now, but it definitely was when I was early in my career. People, I was, for each role that I've taken on, I've been well qualified. In fact, probably more than qualified, and had definitely had the track record. But in each case, I know, and I'm certain, and some people have told me that they had to kind of stick their neck out to be able to engage me for that role, because it occurred as a risk for them. Like there were elements of, well, let's see how she goes, or even if I was the best qualified and most experienced, because I was so different, there was an element of someone taking a risk, like culturally.
Yeah, right.
So then, so if you're in a role like that, like you're making, for me at least, I didn't feel like I had a lot of room for making mistakes. Like if I make a mistake, I mean, in the gas industry, you make a mistake, there's consequences, right? People can get hurt. There's all sorts of things that can happen. But often I thought, well, I'm making a decision now, and it's like, it's going to affect all womankind. I can't fail here, not just for me. It's a lot of pressure. And I know some of our young women, particularly now, particularly if they're in roles where they are kind of trailblazing, it can be a limiting factor and can leave you a little bit careful. In fact, I had a coach years ago now, and I remember her words really carefully. She said, you're killing yourself and your leadership by being careful. You need to stop being careful. And I thought she was insane there for a moment. I'm like, what do you mean? You have no idea. I have to be careful. But then I really got what she meant, and it gave me a whole lot of freedom to swing out and try on ideas and to put forward alternative options and to actually be the diverse voice that people had engaged me for.
Wow, that's really powerful, and I really applaud you for being, and acknowledge you for being so open with us about your journey and what that's like. I'm interested, how did that occur to other people once you started then kind of swinging out, as you say, and saying, no, I'm here, I've been hired for these reasons and I can bring forward this. How did that play out in the environments you're in?
Well, there's always, I found, and I have continued to find, there's always people who are like, oh, thank goodness she's finally being her real self and let's get on with it. But then there are always some that are, oh, hang about, that's not how you've been. You're suddenly being a little bit difficult. And now I have to, like I've got to actually think through my ideas better because I'm going to get challenged, because I've stopped being I'd stopped being so agreeable about everything, for instance. So I found that the continuing to, and I can't say this enough, continuing to develop your skills. We talk about communication, right? But it's more the ability to really engage with people, and to find ways of connecting with people and walking, talk about walking with people, You know, I've gone through stages where I say this sometimes, and it sounds a little bit kind of counterintuitive, but I get really good at apologizing, not for that, just because it sounds like a little bit could be manipulating as well, right? But as I'm expanding and kind of forging out something or carving out a future, it doesn't work for everybody, because people are all on their own journey about their level of being careful. Some people will live their whole life and will never give up being careful. You know, I might even be one of those people, because I keep coming to the edge of, I go, wow, I'm still being careful. You know, oh, okay, I could give up a bit more of that. But there are others that are going to do quite fine. Thank you very much for being careful. So every time I want to launch out into something, there's always the opportunity to keep reflecting on, well, where can I be responsible for how my communication is occurring for someone? I wonder how that occurs for them. I wonder what options are opening up or are in fact getting shut down over there with that person because of the way I'm communicating. You know, now you can see that could even sound like I'm being careful, right? But it's actually being responsible for really being, you know, like, how does the world occur for people? You know, like, it might be the people who I report to. It's one of the things that I've noticed through my career. It's funny, it took me a while to get this right. I can occur as really threatening, you know, like I often think I come across as this big cuddly kindergarten teacher kind of thing, right? But it's often, you know, when someone is willing to communicate authentically, deal responsibly with their own integrity, apologize creatively, and to expand the, you know, the level of responsibility of everyone in every communication. Like, there are always going to be some people that are incredibly threatened by that, because they are sometimes faced with their own lack of courage, maybe, or maybe it seems to them like a shutdown, or, you know, like a, you know, how they thought their leadership was going to go gets closed down, right? Or is limited somehow in their experience. So there's, you know, keeping on listening to, well, how's that showing up over there? And then noticing the cues. Sometimes I'll be like in a meeting or something, I'll go, wow, the lights went off over there with that person. I wonder what that was. You know?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess, you know, just to even further pull it into the realm of the decision making, you know, kind of, we know there are impacts in people not being able to contribute. What do you, when you see those moments where you're saying, the lights have gone off, you know, I hear that as a trigger for this person is not contributing to the decision making, therefore they're not going to have a, well, their views aren't going to be expressed, and they're probably not going to have a commitment to whatever gets decided. How do you go about encouraging that participation back in from them?
Okay, good question. So there's a few layers of it. So one is it really does depend on your relationship with the people. So building relationship with people is critically important. So one, you can see the cues, because if there are people who you don't know so well, or I just won't notice. But the other is again, be, you know, like, the intention is always to bring full communication. Like, you know, like, so I've got my attention on what I want for people rather than what I just want from them. You know, that's a really important part. And it takes, for me, something that I have to keep reminding myself on, because I can be driven and, you know, like, I want to create big things. And sometimes it could occur to people like I just want stuff from them, right? So if I keep my attention on what I want for them, that's a much more open kind of view. And it would also stop me from doing things that could possibly embarrass them. I mean, imagine you're in a meeting and someone has a kind of a thought, and they sit back, and you know that you've kind of lost them. You know, like, how about you, Frank? You know, like, what's your view now? Like, it's, I mean, people have done that to me. It's horrible. Like, no one likes that.
Yeah.
You know, unless, of course, you know, the relationship of the group is such that that's how you roll. And, you know, like, I've been in incredibly dynamic teams where there's a real commitment that everyone's present and connected and working all the time, you know, so you can call people out and they like, thank you for the reminder in that environment. But in a more technical environment where people are, you know, their role is sometimes to do really good assessment. They have, you know, like they, you know, like the engineers that I work with, particularly now at Clough, there is incredibly clever and experienced people here. Their role is to assess and predict. That's what, it's important that they are really connected to what works, what the dangers are, what the risks are, and that they, so then there's just the opportunity to inquire, and it doesn't all have to happen immediately. It might be a private check-in at the end of the meeting. I noticed when we were talking about the development of the offshore facility or whatever it is we're talking about, that you got a bit quiet. I'm really interested in what occurred to you then, because I've got the sense that it's going to be important to our decision making. And then no one has ever said, mind your own business. People always say, wow, thank you. I'm still formulating what my ideas are about it, but these are the 3 things that occurred to me. And then I can, wow, thank you. What I want for them is to be able to fully express themselves and fulfill on their potential in the role. What I want for the project is every quiet voice. I worked as a risk manager for a long time in various elements. Every time something has gone wrong or decisions have been made badly and that's had consequences that are now being investigated, there is always, without exception, someone that says, I knew something was going to go wrong. Or even worse, I told someone that was going to go wrong and no one listened. It's always and it's nothing's ever truly a surprise.
Yeah, and I know it reminds me of when we were talking, to set up this session, one of the things you were really passionate about and you've touched on there is that idea of being fully self-expressed and the opportunity that creates for decision making. And I think you talked a bit about it for yourself and your commitment to others. I think if I can recall, part of the conversation was even just how do you be fully self-expressed as a woman in decision making, as distinct from a man, particularly when you're in a I'm going to make an assumption, a pretty male-dominated workplace and field, and generally, what kind of barriers are there, or opportunities, I suppose, to really bringing all that self-expression?
Yeah, and again, an ongoing issue, right? Like one of the things that I'm loving about Clough, and when I went looking for my next kind of place to live and work and express myself, to be honest, I was looking, I'm 50 now, and I remember having little chats with myself and others, and I said, what, I actually want to go somewhere where I don't have to do so much of the heavy lifting, like that beginning stage where you got to kind of fight to be heard every day. So I did go looking for a place where they'd done a lot of the work in the culture, and they really have. I don't know if there are any Clough women online today, but there is something really special being developed here, and I think we want to keep fostering that. So there's that long game of just noticing, and uncovering those hidden biases, how we might show up and things like that. In the more challenging kind of environments where sometimes when there's, if the conversations are about things that have to be fixed, kind of emergency kind of, people are already feeling threatened, people are quite likely to kind of revert to type, whatever that is for them. They might get upset, they might get dominating, they might get my way or the highway, they might get very protective, and that's all for us. That's kind of completely, that's not a gender issue. We all will tend to take the role that we've kind of most comfortable with. But the main thing that has kind of disappeared when that's happening is that people aren't actually listening, or what they're listening to is something that's a bit more limited, like it's how can I fix this, or how can I make sure this isn't my fault, is another not so generous one. So I find that in those opportunities, particularly when I'm feeling like I want to just go to type, I want to, I can pull out authority sometimes and just tell people what to do, or, get a little, I don't know, a little bossy even, it's something I try not to, because people don't stop listening to me if I'm like that. But to notice where in myself I've shut down my generosity. I'm no longer being generous with these people. I'm noticing that I've decided that, Jane's just going to be an idiot, and Bob's going to be righteous, and any minute Paul's going to stand up and leave the room. And, I've decided who these people are. Then then I'm no longer actually making good decisions. I'm not for people. I'm in full on protective mode. I'm trying to make sure this isn't my fault. So, and sometimes it's, I've done this too. It can be a little risky because you've got to be, it takes a bit of courage, right? To say, hang on, we just got to stop. I've just noticed that I'm already relating to everybody like they're part of the problem. And I apologize. I'm cutting that out right now. We're all part of the solution here. Let's stop and I think we need to do a bit more assessment about what's going on. And then you'll hear those voices that had already decided the world's gone to hell in a handbasket, whatever the expression is. They'll start speaking up because there's a space for it now. They know they're going to be heard.
Yeah.
Now,
I think, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, and now if it's a meeting that you are actually the official leader of, it's kind of a little easier because people are kind of already oriented. They kind of have to listen to you, right? Sometimes it can be a hindrance though, because people will stop thinking while you're talking if you're the leader sometimes. So sometimes, and this is often a role that particularly we're in as women at the moment, we're in, like the statistics you were sharing at the beginning of the session, we're often in those more supportive roles. Even more critically important that we listen, I think, and hold ourselves to account to hear those cues. I did some really great development work some time ago, and I know there's at least one person on the call, Shona, who will know what I'm talking about. The exquisite opportunity of being in team situations and listening out the way you want the conversation to go. Now it takes years of practice and discipline and just shutting up when you want to talk. But people are magnificent, and you'll find, and this is what I find, sometimes I might be in like a 2-hour meeting and I might say 5 words, but I'm clear that I've led the outcomes. And it's, that's something that takes maturity and thinking and teamwork and really checking in with people and developing those skills to be able to create the outcomes in the relationships with people.
Yeah, and what I like about what you just said then, especially, is that what you talked about is, if I get this right, your how you want the conversation to go, not what you want the outcome to be.
Yeah.
So you're coming into the conversation open, but you're clear that how it's going to go is, whatever you're setting up, people can contribute. There's, I'm not going to have a fixed view about how, Paul's going to get up and leave the room. That's what he always does. So it's interesting. I notice for myself always that, I think no matter, like you say, it's a lifelong practice, isn't it? Because we fall into our bias and our, fixed views all the time. I guess interesting sort of segue there. When I asked you to give me a quote about decision making, you came out with something that I thought was really interesting. So you said, great decision making is less about stopping bad things happening and more about harnessing collective wisdom and passion to create and invent together. So I'm getting a bit of a flavour of that from you now. And, what is it about decision making that you think is that kind of, rather than constraining, it's opening up?
Yeah, and I think it's a really great thing to keep exploring too, right? Because it's another one of these conversations that there's no end and no limit. But if we look at the way most committed people operate together, we do want to do the right thing. We're all committed to the right outcome. We want to be somewhat admired for being our part in it. We want to manage the scary stuff. There are things that often before we're really ready to make a decision about great things, we're already really sure about what we don't want. So our minds are designed. I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer, not a psychologist by any means, right? But I've read a lot. But our minds are pretty much oriented to manage risk. We risk management machines. We want to like fundamentally back in the beginning of time, I'm sure we wanted to make sure that we didn't die of the cold. We, didn't get eaten by a bear or a dingo or wherever we live, right? We like to survive, that's conversations for survival, right? And they're completely valid. Like we don't want to let all those things go. Otherwise, that's when we start I don't know, burning ourselves or getting run over or something. We don't want to lose those parts of our brain. We do want to be responsible for, though, that those parts of our brain are probably limiting what's possible. You know, because if we're sure that something is going to be on the off list and we take it off the off list, we're actually going to stop talking about it. You know, so, and an area of work that I've spent a lot of time in is industry safety. And I think this is somewhere where this kind of what I'm kind of talking about here shows up really clearly. Like, it's not that long ago, like sort of 70 years ago, that when sky-rise buildings were built, you know, like anything over about 10 floors, it was completely acceptable, in fact expected, that one person per floor would die in the construction of that building. Okay, so very different from today. Like, it's completely different. That would be absolutely unacceptable now. In fact, if that kind of thing happened, that company would be shut down by midday. That would be just not on, right? But and to achieve better results, what we did for a long time was we stopped the bad things happening. So we would put in safety dividers. We would keep people separated from hot, heavy, sharp, high things to keep them protected. We would we'd give them gloves and hats, and we'd train them. You know, like, we'd have all sorts of things to warn people of the risks, have them present to the consequences, make sure that they didn't hurt themselves, because it became more and more important. And we got really good at doing that, but there was still people getting hurt. And often the way it would show up too would be that there'd be no injuries, 10 people. Like, you know, like, that's because it was all about stopping things from going wrong rather than being truly connected to each other, and, you know, like looking with each other out at a future and asking questions like, well, what am I really willing for? You know, when I work with particularly committed engineers, who some of my favorite people in the world, like people who are, you know, committed to shaping the physical world in ways that work for human beings. I mean, it's extraordinary what engineering people do. So incredibly committed, right? But their job is mostly to predict risks, you know, which can shut down the creativity. So if I ask them, is someone going to get hurt on this project? Often their response is, well, in all honesty, probably, you know, like, because the last one did, and the one before that, and, you know, like, they'll say things like, there's a limit to what we can do. There's always going to be something. Right now, that's probably an accurate response from the world of prediction. and someone from that view is going to do everything they can to stop that possibly inevitable bad thing happening, right? But a different way to answer that question might be, well, what are you truly willing for? Or when you look out at the future, like it's almost, you know, like a question I ask people sometimes is, well, who are you about the safety results of this project? And it's a very different question. So the answer, like, when I answer that question, I'm like, no way, no how, no one is going to get hurt on this. On my watch, no one gets hurt. You know, and that's the way I've operated my whole career, and I've won awards for the difference that those projects have made. You know, and it's not because I'm weak at predicting. It's because I'm standing somewhere that there's no tolerance for anything that shows up that is going to have us make decisions that could lead to someone getting hurt. Just those little ones that come in, like, oh, a little shortcut here, or oh, you know, this is one of those times when inevitably something's going to go wrong. You know, like, no. So, and it allows people to work together in a way to create safe outcomes rather than just putting off what everybody knows is inevitable. Right. So in the safety sense, it's fairly obvious, right? Because there is hurt or not hurt, you know. But in the business sense, or in the expansion of something sense, or the, you know, or even, you know, often we're working in situations where the decision is, it's either good or even better. Like, there's not actually even a bad possibility, you know. So it's being able to continue to be noticing where you're shutting down the options because you want to protect something, rather than having the courage to continue to go, well, what if we we created a bigger possibility. And what would it take for us to generate that together? What requests would I have to make? How willing am I to be uncomfortable in the face of the unknown to produce an outcome that might otherwise be shut down or not possible?
Yeah, that's a really great example. Thank you for sharing that. And it makes me think, I know for me, when I'm talking with organisations about their decision making specifically, I can relate to that same thing. Often the thing is, we want to have processes in place to minimise the risk in our decision making. We want to know that there are 3 types of models and methods that we use in this organisation to do decision making, and we can pull them off the shelf at any time to make decisions. And then inevitably what happens is the day-to-day doesn't match the decisions that are made. And so we know that those organisations that approach the people side of things, that have the active participation of people and stakeholders in the decision making, will get the psychology and the behaviour side right. So it's actually about, oh yeah, what does it look like to be, we use decision thinking in my day-to-day life, not just, well, I put my hat on at this point and make decisions. It's a bit like you're saying, if my stand is for not on my watch, no risk to life happening on this site, then that shows up in everything. So yeah, it's a great example of how that has had a real impact. And congratulations for all your accolades in that area as well. Like, it sounds really, I guess it's interesting. I don't know if this is the case. I'm interested to hear, do you think, because we're specifically looking at women in strategic decision making as well, do you think that there's something about women being able to do that kind of sort of creative generation of options and sort of standing for something in that realm, or is it, I don't know, just...
I think definitely. And I think part of it is as we all continue to redefine leadership, right? Because I've worked with some organisations where it looks like they have great leadership, but they actually have strong people that are good at telling people what to do. Now, that is a form of leadership, but it's not I would say not such a creative form. It's not one that harnesses the potential of the people. I think as women, we often have, at the moment, we have an opportunity sometimes to be able to listen just a little longer, and I think we want to really capitalize on that too. We're often not the ones at the front, with the arm raised in the air and going forward, and we're often not under those kind of pressures at the moment. Some of us are, right? I know there are women who are listening to this who are like, no, I'm at the front. Like, I have no time to think. Often we do, though, right? So I think it is to maximize that. I do quite a lot of work. This is something else that another whole hour to talk about, Linda, but I chair the Hunger Project. For those of you who know what the Hunger Project is, then thank you for knowing that. Those who don't, it's an international aid project that was created probably in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And it really was from a declaration that all people will live a sustainable, self-reliant life everywhere, like India, Bangladesh, Africa, Latin America, wherever people living in poverty, that will end. And we've given them a date, like 2030 is when that's going to end, right? So it works with people in communities in some of the most at-risk, impoverished parts of the world to enable them to end their own hunger. So the Hunger Project does sound a bit like it's about giving people food, but it's actually about allowing people to thrive. And the people that the attention is focused on the most is women. Right. Now, there's been many studies, and I have not read any of them, all of them by any means, but many studies that show unquestionably that if you enable a girl or a woman, that it is way more effect on the community than if you enable a man. Now, it sounds unfair. I've had people that have been like, well, that's not fair. No, but you can't look at it individually. It's just like as a society, if we harness the power of women, it makes an unquestionable difference. And now there are hundreds of communities throughout Africa who are living now sustainably because of the funding and the development's been made available through their own communities. It's not like people that like you and I, Belinda, that go into places like Ghana and Malawi. No, it's people that have grown up in those societies that have been trained separately that actually do that work. It's extraordinary, right? But it is women centric because, and it is some of it that sort of seems a little magical, but one of the things that happens is when women really harness their own power and start living confidently and developing their own potential, then the men come along too. Like the frustration in the communities, like this huge, they call it gender-based violence in some of these communities, and that essentially disappears when there's a balance that comes, because mostly people don't live and work together well when they're at that worst end of survival and they don't know what to do and they can't kind of break free of it. So breaking that paradigm, it's taking people from a view of I can't to I can and we will, and then they harness it together. So kind of a long back down to us, right? Because we probably no one on this call is ever going to be in their lives risking of starvation. I've often say to people, whatever takes me out, it's not going to be starvation. Very unlikely, right? I've been lucky to, and all of us have been, you could say, been very fortunate to be born to where we're born. We do live incredibly privileged lives. And, maybe there's other things we're hungry for, though. Maybe there are things that we are not yet embracing in ourselves, that little quiet whisper that says things like, I should be more courageous, or maybe if I was more curious, maybe that would give me access to that. Maybe if I was willing to reach out to someone and inquire a little differently, maybe, I don't know, like we can use this one up pretty quickly, but, be willing to ask the dumb question. It just gives people so much freedom when someone else does that. And continue to work together like this. Like one of the things that I found throughout my career is, the power of just showing up. Just show up. Someone asks you to do a presentation or to have a fabulous interview in front of fabulous women, or just be a yes first and then work it out. Like it's and actually Grace might be having a chuckle here because this is a conversation that she and I have, and I've learned from her because of her courage too. But we often talk about, we say, oh, but I've got this opportunity, and now she'll say back to me, which one's the scary one? Okay, good, do that.
Right.
And it's it gives us an opportunity to live proudly and to make a bigger difference. Because
I think that I'm hearing behind that too. So if you're making that decision that says which of these is the scary one, which one am I more inclined to do versus scary. The interesting thing about your decision making there is why is it scary? What's scarier about that than the other, and what do you actually, as you say, sort of uncover about your own bias, your own limiting beliefs, all those things that actually are, full circle back to the start of our conversation, are showing up in decision making that really need to be addressed.
And trust yourself. We know the difference between risky, like true, like wow, something could blow up risk. Now I'm not saying that, like follow the Australian standards, people, but the kind of relationship risk is the one. Like, I was coming off to work the other day and, like in this brand new role, I'm 50 and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm an old dog. This is a new trick, having those kind of conversations with myself. And then I had this moment, I went, you know what, the power of my leadership is the willingness to continue to be in situations where I'm uncomfortable. My willingness to be uncomfortable is such an important part of my leadership. And it's inspiring. And a really great leader a while ago, is actually one of our leaders with the Hunger Project in Bangladesh. His name's Badil. And he said the currency of leadership is courage. We often think that it's knowledge or power or wisdom, and those things are important, but the actual currency of leadership is courage, willingness to be uncomfortable. Sometimes it is going first. Sometimes it's making a request that might get a resounding no. That the famous leaders throughout history were always men and women who were had extreme levels of willingness to be comfortable. You know, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi. You know, we can pick all of them out. Like even Oprah. Like willingness, different kinds of discomfort, right? But that, you know, but to be exposed to your weakness until something new happens in the world, I find that incredibly inspiring. And we've all got that within us, all of us, every day. Today, we could make some uncomfortable decisions that would change the face of life. Like today, we could do that. Some of us will. Some of us have already done that this morning. You know,
post about it in the chat if you did it this morning, please. We want to hear about it. I will just say we are going to. I've got one more question for you, and if anyone has any questions or comments, I can see my inference. Grace, thanks for your comments. Helps me every time. So I'd say that there's a mutual inspiration happening back and forth there. So
sure
nice
is.
to see. Thank you. So yeah, pop any questions or comments you've got in the chat. My kind of closing question from me to you, Jillian, is what wisdom you would pass on to a woman who wants to get more involved in strategic decision making?
Yeah, really good question. And I think it does go to the courage. And look, get good coaching. You know, like something that I learned early, thankfully, was I am an unreliable witness for what's possible with my life. Unreliable. So find people and communities of people who are going to be more interested in your success than you are. Okay, that doesn't mean go join a illegal gang or something, but do surround yourself with people who are going to be more interested in your success. And look, I've got the negative voice in my head is, I promise, just as loud as everybody else's. It's, you know, in fact, maybe sometimes even louder, you know, like I've got all sorts of reasons to remind myself that I'm small and insignificant and can't make a difference. But I surround myself with people who are louder than my own voice in my head. And I become that for others. So, you know, like to keep, you know, my advice is to keep creating your generosity of listening for people. Keep noticing when you've decided what's possible. That's the worst decision. You've decided what's possible and then you cut off the options. You know, like one of the biggest gifts that my husband and I give us, Grace's father. You're getting lots of airtime here, Grace. Laurie and I.
You are, Grace. We'll have to have you on in future.
Laurie and I promised ourselves very early on that we would never sell out to what we think is possible and think that the other person is. And every time I notice, because, you know, we meet people and we fall in love, and then we get all hell bent on knowing them, right? We think it's a really good idea, you know. And although I don't think anyone in the world knows me better than Laurie, however, we don't allow that to limit each other. Because even if I say, wow, he's fabulous, my version of fabulous is the only thing that's possible, rather than, no, I have no interest in ever knowing what's possible for that human being. Now, it's hardest with our intimate partners because that's, you know, there's lots at stake, right? But we can do that with everybody. I wonder what, you know, and just being in a conversation with ourselves and others about and bring curiosity, generosity, and courage to every one of those conversations. And it's something I often say too is leadership's, it's a team sport. You know, it is something you can't do on your own, but it's also an extreme sport, and that's where the courage comes in. You know, being able to live and create, and you know, and the people in your life are the ones that will, you know, keep you true. You know, remind you of who you are when you've forgotten, because we all do from time to time.
That is great advice. Thank you. And yeah, thanks. I can see Susan says, yes, all need to be reminded of this. And it makes me even, thanks for sharing a personal example too, because I think there's some access for me too in personal relationships, and how those, even when you're speaking fondly and in a way that, you know, is about your love or your care for that person, actually you can be placing limitations on that individual. So yeah, I think that's great. One question here, you said earlier willingness to be uncomfortable, and it struck a chord with me because it's easy to look at someone successful and just think they've all got it going on, it must be easy for them, but in reality they're just willing to be uncomfortable over and over again. More of a comment? I think that's
That's I think that's often the case. It's yeah, I mean, look, that doesn't mean, I mean, we all know people that have burnt themselves out. In fact, some of us listening here have probably been in times when they've stopped looking after themselves or some aspects of themselves, and it's kind of gone the wrong way.
Yeah.
But then sometimes correcting that is another form of being willing to be uncomfortable. Like it might be resetting some boundaries with people.
Yeah.
People that you've kind of allowed to use you up in some way, perhaps. And it takes courage to correct some of that. Again, really great to get an outside witness on, like, you know, like the unreliable witness in your mind is going to often want to keep doing the same thing and stay safe. You know, I often feel like when I really do, and I've had some big corrections in my life, it does feel a little bit like dying, you know, because I'm so used to that old comfortable rut. And to pop yourself out of that rut and be able to start creating a new pathway can take a lot of effort, and often not something to do on your own. You know, you need someone else to kind of hold your hand for a bit while you're creating a new pathway. That's necessary, way beyond valid. It's necessary.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Great advice. So I'm just going to, thank you so much for your generosity in this today, and for getting really, I think, well, for me, getting uncomfortable, being vulnerable with sharing what you have about both your professional experiences and personal, and where you stand in decision making. Great examples on where that creativity and invention has really impacted safety in engineering. So, you know, what a great examples that you provide in really real life. So thank you so much, and thanks for being part of the WiSDM community. And it's a really great, and looking forward to having Grace on here next time. So watch out, Grace. I am actually putting together a panel of in the future for younger practitioners. So I keep an ear on that, and if you've got anyone in mind, do send them along. So thank you, Jillian.
Brilliant. Thank you, Belinda. I have had a fabulous time with you, and if anyone wants to reach out to me for a personal conversation, you let them know that I'm more than willing to do that.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'll share your contact details then when I send an email out to the recording for everyone. Thank you. That's very generous. Great. So that was our 6th WiSDM Wednesday, and I just want to thank everyone for their ongoing support, you know, showing up here every fortnight, sending me messages on LinkedIn, joining in our conversations in the LinkedIn group, the emails I get. It really is what keeps me showing up every fortnight to do this. So thank you for letting me know what impact it's having, because it really does inspire me to keep going. We are going to take a short break from WiSDM Wednesdays, just one fortnight off, and that is to allow some time for some strategic planning, for working through some of the governance and administration matters for the new association structure that I announced last fortnight, and to prepare for our very exciting next event, which is going to be with the Society of Decision Professionals. So we're going to announce details of that shortly, but we're going to do a joint event with the SDP, which is a global organisation for decision professionals. So you can keep the conversation going in the meantime in our LinkedIn group. I'm still going to do a WiSDM Wrap next fortnight, so do send me through any of your contributions to that, anything you're seeing that you'd like mentioned. As always, share, get more people involved in the conversation. I will be providing the details from today and Jillian's details, and, you know, just noting, seeing this is sort of almost like wrapping up season 1. I just want to acknowledge again our guests so far. So Julia Cookson, Susan McGinty, Pip Werdeman, Joanna Marsh, Carolyn Grant, and Jillian today. Thank you all for you know, jumping in wholeheartedly and sharing everything with the group and beyond. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.